Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. This is Melanie guest hosting today. It's inauguration day for the 103rd General Assembly. I have Bryce Hill, Director of Fiscal and Economic Research for the Illinois Policy Institute, here today to talk through what taxpayers need from the new cast of lawmakers taking over Springfield. Bryce, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's not easy to be in Illinois, and given everything that taxpayers face here, where should this new group of lawmakers prioritize as they kick off the next legislative session?
I think guiding principles for this General Assembly should really be something we talk about a lot here, which are empowering Illinoisans. I think we kind of put that into three big buckets here. The first being no new taxes, no tax hikes, extremely important for stability within the state. The second going to be along similar lines, property tax relief, which is the highest tax burden that Illinoisans pay, currently second highest in the nation. And then third is going to be support for small businesses who have been the most resilient job creators really over the past decade, but particularly over the past couple of years. So I think those are like three key areas where I would like to see lawmakers focus, and we can do a deep dive into what each of those actually look like.
Perfect. Let's kick it off with the first one that you mentioned. No tax hikes. Is that even possible here?
It's possible, yes. I think it takes the political will to do so. And right now, top of everybody's mind, we spent a lot of time talking about it. Illinoisans have heard about it and recently seen it, is the automatic gas tax increase. This was a talking point during the campaign because Governor Pritzker delayed the 2022 automatic increase in the gas tax. It just took place on the 1st, and the gas tax rose to 42.3 cents per gallon. Gas taxes are second highest in the nation in Illinois, behind only California. In 2019, Governor Pritzker doubled the gas tax, the state motor fuels tax specifically, to be second highest in the nation, and then enacted automatic annual increases that are tied to inflation. So in this most recent year, obviously, inflation hit record highs for the past 40 years, and the tax increase came in at 8.2% for the year. Obviously, extremely unpopular during a political campaign that the governor was running. So that conveniently got delayed until just after the election. But the reason why it got delayed and the unpopularity of it really speaks to why we shouldn't be, allowing automatic increases in taxes to begin with, because it was passed through and seen as, a reasonable measure, but inflation is unpredictable and lawmakers should be accountable to their constituents. Automatic tax increases remove pretty much both of those things. We're not accountable to constituents if we don't actually have to vote on anything. Taxes just keep going up. And there's no actual stability by pegging something to inflation, because in the short term, especially, we don't know what it's going to be. So I think that's, the most immediate thing Illinoisans would probably like to see. But in the longer term, a truly balanced budget. Currently, we have a balanced budget requirement in Illinois, but it only requires balance on a prospective basis, meaning lawmakers can say, this is what we expect revenues to be. No rhyme or reason why we expect them to be this way, but here's what we expect. Here's what we plan on spending. The numbers are in line. We're good to go. But unfortunately, that's rarely the case. Pew Charitable Trust just released a report this week showing that Illinois is one of two states where revenues fall short of expenditures by more than 5% for the past 15 years. So it's consistently revenues and expenditures don't meet. That's part of the reason why we have this continuing increase in our tax burden. And Illinoisans pay, one of the highest tax burdens in the Midwest. For the middle class specifically, they pay among the highest in the nation. So this is really where we should start to address these problems.
The next one you mentioned is also related to taxes, and one that we've seen lawmakers campaign upon before, this idea of property tax relief. making it easier to afford to buy homes and to live here. But we haven't really seen it executed. So, what could lawmakers in this session do differently than some of these promises that have been made before?
Yeah, this is another example of where it was another campaign issue. We saw an income tax credit, the property tax credit on your income taxes. Uh, Governor Pritzker decided to pass a second tax credit, meaning most households got rebates that were worth up to $300 for their property taxes. But an actual way to provide property tax relief, if we wanted to, exists. We currently have PTEL, the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, which in most places limits the growth in property taxes to 5% or inflation, whichever's less. We could very simply say, rather than using that mechanism of 5% or inflation, we could just say 0%. Let's not grow it at all. So we could temporarily put the limiting rate at 0%, enact essentially statewide property tax freeze, and put the brakes on, what is the second highest property tax burden in the nation, the largest tax bill that Illinoisans pay. We could do that essentially overnight with some action in the legislature. The mechanisms exist. Most politicians and Illinoisans say that they're extremely concerned about it. If we wanted to do that, we could.
What does that look like?
It looks like, the legal mechanism is just legislation that says, from X to Y, we put it at 0%. If localities needed an increase in revenue, if they had, certain expenses coming up, they could go to taxpayers and ask for a referendum under the current structure of PTEL to pass a tax increase with voter approval. So it wouldn't actually hamstring governments from gaining access to more revenue. It would simply just require that their constituents approve it. And I think it'd be, a much more realistic and effective way to give some temporary property tax relief while we start to rein in other areas that have been the driver of increasing property taxes in the first place.
It would empower taxpayers to be part of the conversation. But you are leading into the next aspect of property tax relief, I believe.
The bottom line, tax relief across the board, particularly for property taxes, is going to hinge on pension reform, constitutional pension reform. It's the largest driver of the deterioration in state finances. The statewide systems, according to the state's own estimates, unfunded liabilities grew by $10 billion last year to nearly the highest level ever seen. $140 billion in unfunded liabilities. That's future tax dollars that we know we're going to need to pay absent reform. So letting the people decide, hey, we can open up the Constitution and change these things. We don't necessarily have to have what the exact proposal is. That can be figured out in the state legislature, but at least giving the ability for changes in future liabilities would be huge for reducing that tax burden. A previous plan that the Illinois Policy Institute put forth would have, fully funded pensions and reduced the unfunded liability, I should say, by nearly $50 billion through the lifetime of the plan, which is currently through 2045. Would have provided a sustainable path for, a reduced state tax burden, but also a reduced local and property tax burden. So this is where we should start. And if we were getting serious about tax relief in the state of Illinois, whether it's the state or local level, that's the most important factor right now.
Thanks, Bryce. I think a lot of listeners have heard us talk about how important pension reform is, and that was a great summary. I'm really excited and intrigued about your third recommendation for lawmakers because I think it's very original and something that may surprise people about Illinois.
Yeah, so support for small businesses, I kind of touched on, and on this podcast in the past, I've talked about the importance of small businesses for the Illinois community and the Illinois economy. Small businesses are the only businesses over the past 2 years to actually grow employment. Other classes of businesses with more than 20 employees have actually, the payrolls remain smaller than they were before the pandemic. 2/3 of pre-pandemic jobs growth came from small businesses as well. So it's extremely important to support, our main job creators. But in Illinois, we don't exactly do that. We have one of the strictest and most cumbersome regulatory environments in the nation. So on top of the tax burden that we've been talking about that businesses also face, Illinois has more than 270,000 regulations in state statute. That's double what the typical state has, third most in the nation behind Ohio and California. So really, in addition to a painful tax burden, we have an incredibly complex regulatory code that entrepreneurs and businesses also have to, hurdle through to open up their doors in the state. It's one of the main reasons why we have an extremely high level of business applications, people who are looking to start a business, but we actually have one of the lowest business opening rates in terms of applications that actually make it all the way through the process and result in a business opening their doors or employing people. And the strict regulatory code is likely one of the main reasons for that. So to kind of address that problem, we are going to propose a commission that identifies regulations, old regulations that were enacted, a sunset commission for, here are places that are rife for improvement based on old regulations, and new regulations that are passed should have some sort of sunset where we go back and review and see, are we accomplishing the goals? Are they necessary? Or are we just hamstringing our economy even more?
And the thought is that by reducing these regulations, we can make it easier to have a business here in Illinois.
Absolutely, yeah. So, regulatory burdens have been shown to make it incredibly difficult for entrepreneurs who are wanting to start a business to actually start their businesses. The thought here being anywhere where we can identify, and in a state where we have among the most regulations in the nation, there should be plenty of them, places where regulation is either unnecessary or not actually accomplishing the intended purposes, we should be able to pare that down and make it simpler for businesses who want to open. Along similar lines, another place we could go to is universal licensing recognition. So, if you're deemed qualified to cut hair in Michigan or run a catering business in Indiana, you should be deemed qualified in Illinois as well. We shouldn't be discouraging entrepreneurs, people looking to move to Illinois from doing so solely because, we want them to put in even more hours of education or certification when they're up to date and approved in another state. We should make it easy for these people to come here to our state as well and operate here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that rundown, Bryce. That was a really exciting look. I'm intrigued to see what the next 2 years hold for this General Assembly, but these are ideas that could empower taxpayers and hopefully help turn around our state. I just want to add, if any listeners are hearing this and you're excited about some of these ideas, you can go to illinoispolicy.org, visit our Take Action page, contact your local representatives, send them a call or an email through our portal, and tell them that you want them to support pension reform, reducing regulations on businesses, or freezing property taxes. Let's get this state on a better path. So thank you, Bryce.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Listen and subscribe to The Policy Shop wherever you get your podcasts.